Last week, I followed on from that. I shared a little bit of my personal story of identifying with that falling into a pit, in the pit of our own creation. The one that anyone who has called themselves a follower of Christ has experienced. Because I believe that is the first true prayer. When we get to that bottom place and we say, God, help, I can't do this myself any longer. There's no deeper theology than that. That is the heart of it. Paul says we must cry this out. And I think that sometimes, because that's such a dark place, it's easy for us to feel like we put it all together and now we're at shiny and we're good in our faith and we move on. But last week, I hope that you were reminded, as I was, through my own story, that we must never trust our own hearts. That we must really come to a firm decision within ourselves that we are actually not good for ourselves. The things that we desire for ourselves will bring us to our own pit of destruction. The scriptures we quoted from Proverbs says, cursed or woe to anyone who trusts their own hearts. There's something greater to trust in, and that's what we looked at last week. This morning, I want to follow on from that a little bit, and I want to talk about, so we talked falling, and then last week rising. This week I want to reflect through just two passages in Scripture, the Old Testament and the New Testament, sort of bookends that both speak to the same issue that I want to talk about, this growing. So it isn't just, our life isn't just this falling again and getting back up and rising and falling, and thank God it's not that. Thank God that there's something new and transformative at work in us. Something that every time we get up with Christ, we are stronger and we see more clearly. If you remember the blind man, when he was healed from blindness by Jesus' mud and spit rubbed into his eyes, he didn't immediately see everything in HD. In fact, his first few moments were, do I see trees? Do I see people? What? No, it's moving people. Oh, no, it's actually people. Okay, I think that it took a while for the mud and spit to get out of his eyes. But this is how it is with us. Every time we get up, we see a little bit more clearly. We must stay humble because, as we said, Paul says, we're always going to see dimly lit. We're never going to see absolute perfection. That's why we need each other so much, to keep us humble, but also to help us see things that we don't see for ourselves. Each one of us has a very unique relationship with God. I would hesitate to call it a personal relationship with God because I don't believe that we have a personal relationship with God. I believe we have a corporate relationship with God. And that if we make it into just personal, we've actually cut ourselves off from a large portion of God. The people of God. The body of God. Last week I shared a bit of my story in its drama, but I also want to share a bit this morning that isn't so dramatic. I mean, last week I talked about how I ruined my own life and God came in His mercy, like He comes to so many of us. Romans says that when we were on the path to our own destruction, God still came to us in love. But I want to start before that. I want to actually go back to the first time I heard the seed was planted that finally took root many years later in my destruction. And I remember being 13 years old and being a musician and loving music and sitting at a Sunday school class during the summertime because we didn't really go to church. But we went to my cousin's church during summertime. And so my cousin got up to preach, and he was a youth pastor at the time, and he was a very good one, and he scared me right into faith. he preached the hellfire and brimstone, and he threw in a little Eagles, Peaceful, Easy Feeling. You know that song by the Eagles? Peaceful, easy feeling. Well, that led me to the Lord. Because I sat there at 13 years old, and I heard him tell his story, and I wanted that peaceful, easy feeling. Already at 13 years old, I lived enough to know that, man, things were getting stressful. And the older I got, the more stressful it was. And I was looking everywhere for a peaceful, easy feeling. So I remember going forward, and I remember going up in the altar call when they had it and praying. And then I remember getting baptized at 13 years old. And it was all beautiful. And I look back now as this wonderful time of seed planting. But I also remember like a week later, my brother and I were riding on our bicycles. And my brother was a bit suspicious of this experience that I had had and all the attention that I had gotten for going up in front of all the people. And my little brother, riding in his bike, and we got into a little tussle, as you do with your brothers. And I pushed him off his bike. And he got up and the first thing he said was, see, I knew you weren't a believer. I knew that was just faking. I knew you just wanted to get an extra piece of cake that night for going up and being saved. And I'll tell you, for years, I struggled with whose voice was right. The voice that led me up there a week before, or the voice of my brother? For a long time. And I think that it was a good example of, I think the personal relationship started then, but because it wasn't rooted in community, because we didn't go to a church where I could be discipled, where I could learn from older people of the faith, I could be stretched, I could get strength from peers in the faith, because I didn't have any of that. I ended up going my own way, trusting my own heart, with a little bit of insight, a little bit of enlightenment about there might be something more, but it was far from me. I think what was missing was growth. That's what I want to look at this morning. And I want to look at it specifically in the context of how growth is talked about in the scriptures, because I think for us to see it, we have to let go of a whole lot of ways that we think growth happens. It's much more simple, I think, than we make it, and it's at the same time, it's much more, we have responsibilities, but it's not like, Paul says, going to the gym is profitable for our bodies, but the spiritual gym is even more profitable. That's what I want to look at. What does that spiritual gym part look like? What is the context of that? We're going to take this series into another series after this, that Rulof and I are going to unpack different ways that people connect with God. And so this series was sort of setting up, and now this is a transition into that. But I want to start back in the Old Testament. I want to start in the book of Jeremiah. And I want to look at the prophet Jeremiah speaking about this new resurrection life. This series we're talking about really has just been about the resurrection life, the life of recognizing that we die to ourselves and we are raised up again in Christ. But Jeremiah lived in a very dark time in the history of God's people. At the beginning of his ministry, he was actually seeing the nation of Israel, the people of Jerusalem, and the temple system, and its last legs. And he was actually seeing it fall apart, so much so that in his own lifetime, he saw the temple be destroyed. He saw the king of the Israelites, Josiah, killed. And he spoke words of hope into this dark time. One of his first journeys or assignments as a prophet was to go to the 10 exiled, scattered tribes of Israel outside of the Promised Land and tell them, guys, the story's not over. Take hope. The story's not over. And so this is where we begin. Jeremiah chapter 32. Chapter 31. This thing is cursed. I'm going to have to put some healing oil on this thing. I don't know what it is. Okay. Jeremiah chapter 31. Listen to what right before this, it says that Jeremiah was in this long dream. And in the dream, he saw this. A message from God of the angel armies. When I turned back around and brought my people back, when I've turned everything around and brought my people back, the old expressions will be heard on the streets. God bless you. Oh, true home. Oh, holy mountain. All Judah's people, whether in town or country, will get along just fine with each other. What a picture. We know that the kingdom hasn't fully come yet, because that's not true yet. They don't get along with each other. He says, I will refresh their tired bodies. I will restore their tired souls. Just then I woke up and I looked around. What a pleasant and satisfying sleep. Wow, such a contrast to sleep that you were talking about. But then you went back to sleep after the prayer and you had a pleasant and satisfying sleep. Pay attention to our dreams in the context of what you said there. I mean, you look in the scriptures, God uses this dream state to speak to us, but it takes a lot of faith to figure out how to put those dream realities into our actual reality, right? If you're going to start interpreting your dreams, I think you need to do that in community even more so. Get some people around you, because dreams can be weird, right? Weird. But this one was not a weird dream. This one was a beautiful dream. This was Jeremiah seeing that in spite of how dark things looked, there was something greater coming. There was some new hope. And it calmed his soul. And then listen to what he says. Be ready. The time is coming when I will plant people and animals in Israel and Judah, just as a farmer plants a seed. Think of that image. Jesus comes many years later, and what does he say? The kingdom of God is like a seed planted in the soil. a farmer plants a seed, one thing that's easy to miss in our spiritual life is that seeds take a long time to grow to maturity. To grow a plant from a seed to fruit bearing takes many seasons. It doesn't happen overnight. Jesus said in Mark's Gospel chapter 4, when he taught about the seed, he said, this is the most important parable. If you don't understand how this works, you won't understand how the kingdom works at all. It's so deep what he was saying there, but one of the things that is clear is that this growth started by God planting seeds, not by us getting on the right track. If we feel like we have moved forward in the faith, if we are these people thousands of years later that this prophecy was talking about, it didn't begin in us. It began long before us. Seeds were planted. Keep that idea. It's such a powerful strengthening of our faith to realize that we are a part of a long journey. None of these ideas started yesterday. And in the same way that earlier I relentlessly pulled up and tore down, took apart and demolished, so now I am sticking with them as they start over, building and planting. This is significant words because he's speaking about this new covenant that's coming. It's not just better than the old covenant, it's a fulfillment of that old covenant. It's a new type of promise, and this is a very distinct point he's making here because we still live in a world where things get torn apart and broken down. And did you see the tsunamis that they had again? And the floods and things being destroyed, and then people standing up and saying that it was God's judgment. And God, through the prophet Jeremiah, is saying there was a time when that is how I related to people. I caused floods and destruction, but you know what? There's a new season. Now I'm starting over. I'm building and planting, growing through new seasons. And he starts to get very clear. He says, when that time comes, you won't hear the old proverb anymore that parents ate the green apples and their children got the stomachache. Some passages say that, some translations say that parents ate sour grapes and their kids had the bitter taste. No, each person will pay for his own sin. You eat the green apples and you're the one who gets sick. This is also a significant change from the way that they understood this old covenant, this old type of life. Something that we've spoken about in here more than once because this idea of generational sins being passed on still does sort of linger and hold us back in many ways in the church. And this is the prophet coming and saying, yes, that is how things used to work, but now they work differently. And this one is significant. It's very easy to be alive now and to say, oh, well, I'm suffering these things because of what my parents did. Because my great-grandfather did those foolish, horrible things, I'm suffering and I'm miserable. This is actually putting the finger squarely of responsibility in our own chests. It's saying that, no, man, it's not about where you came from. It's about where you're standing right now. Take responsibility. That's right, he speaks again, even more clearly. The time is coming when I will make a brand new covenant with Israel and Judah. Because of the words of Paul saying that we are grafted into the tree of Israel, he's speaking about us. A new covenant with us as much as with the people who are hearing. It won't be a repeat of the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took their hand and led them out of Egypt. They broke that covenant even though I did my part as their master. It's just such the heart of God that He has something for us and we pervert it and we make it into something that doesn't serve us, and God forgives us and tries to give us a better way. Listen to this. This is the brand new covenant that I will make with Israel when the time comes. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts and be their God. And they will be my people. They will no longer go around setting up schools to teach each other about God. They'll know me firsthand, the dull and the bright, the smart and the slow. I'll wipe the slate clean for each of them. I'll forget that they ever sinned. This is challenging words because of the way that we typically think about how growth happens. We typically think about it being about me passing information on to you. We think if we can just get enough information, if we can get the right information, because there's wrong information out there. That's why we need Google to filter it for us. If we can just get the right information and enough of it, then we can get it all sorted out. We can put a picture of the world together that will work for us. And we believe that that's growth. In fact, that's what we're taught, is how we grow in almost every category. If you go and you want to learn something, the first thing they do is give you a book. Go fill your head with this. That wasn't always the way. They didn't give Jesus a book when he wanted to learn to be a carpenter. How do you think he learned to be a carpenter? Yeah, watching his dad be a carpenter, right? Yeah? Seeing how a carpenter does it. Watching what a carpenter is. It's a different picture of growth, one that I think Jesus understood so firmly that it was offensive to the people of his day. Because he wasn't going to be that kind of teacher. He wasn't going to stand there and give them information about God to satisfy what they thought was missing. He was going to give them what they really needed. Let's fast forward just a little bit, because this context that Jeremiah was speaking into, this context that I believe is at the heart of what our faith should look like today. If we get what Jeremiah was saying, I think our faith will be transformed today. We understand what the kind of growth that can happen when we don't need schools to teach us. How do we still grow? So we go thousands of years past this day, the words of Jeremiah, we go to the time of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. And now Jesus is in a context where the same tradition that Jeremiah was a part of had moved on many, many years. And they believe at the time of Jesus, the prophets like Jeremiah were read probably the lowest that they were in the Jewish traditions. At that point in time, they just weren't reading. These weren't the greatest hits, the top 40 scriptures to be reading. So when Jesus came and taught a lot of his teachings out of these books, Isaiah and Jeremiah, it seemed like it was coming from a different place because they weren't that familiar with it. Watch what happens here in Matthew's Gospel 23. It says this: Now Jesus turned to address his disciples. Now this is important to realize that this is a conversation he's having with his disciples. He's teaching them something here, but he's doing it in front of other people who are listening. Now Jesus turned to address his disciples along with the crowd that had gathered with them. The religion scholars and Pharisees are competent teachers in the law. You won't go wrong in following their teachings on Moses, but be careful about following them. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take it into their hearts and live it out in their behavior. It's all spit and polished veneer. That's a real challenge, not just in Jesus' day 2,000 years ago, but in today's day, as we spoke about at the beginning. Sometimes the motivation to want to have it all together, to want to be a good example, to want to be a super Christian, can easily turn into a show. We must regularly, before others, admit our failings so that we can stay on level ground. Because so easily, when people come alive in the Spirit, I've seen it. I'm inspired by when something moves and I can sense God's presence, and there's a part of me that I want my life to look like that. For the right reasons, of course, because I'm super spiritual. I know I'm the only one who's like that, but there is the temptation like Jesus is speaking into, and religious leaders in our day fall into it. I fall into it. Jesus had personal offense for the way that they were leading was affecting the people. Instead of giving God's law as food and drink by which you can banquet on God, they packaged it up in bundles of rules, loading them down like pack animals. They seemed to take pleasure in watching you stagger under these loads and wouldn't think of lifting a finger to help. Their lives are fashion shows, embroidered with prayer shawls and flowery prayers. They love to sit at the head of the table at church dinners, basking in the prominent positions, preening in the radiance of public flattery, receiving degrees like doctor and reverend, leader, apostle, bishop. Whenever we set up people as experts and we try to feed off of what they have, we run this temptation of feeding something else in them that makes an ego grow. It's very common. It's not just in the church, it's just human nature. This is what they had fallen into. They had lost track of God so much that they were doing all of their religious activities from a very human, selfish perspective. And we can do that too. We don't need to have prayer shawls. We can do that with how much I worship. Or, how quickly I am to say an eloquent prayer. But it's not about any of those things. Sometimes the best prayer you can offer is silence. And then Jesus turns to his disciples because he's saying all this to make a point. He's saying it in front of the Jewish leaders who are taking offense, but he says, don't let people do that to you. Don't let them put you on a pedestal. You all have a single teacher, and you're all classmates. Who do you think that teacher is he's referring to? Jesus. I heard it. Someone said Jesus. Someone say it louder. Jesus. Jesus, not whisper Jesus. Come on, guys. Jesus, that's right. That's why I got a little excited there, but I remember when I looked at my pastor in the ways I should have been looking at Jesus. And I remember how wise he was to shut me down and give me the book and say, I want you to get to know Jesus. Read the Gospel of John and put all this theology questions you got. Those are all going to come to a place in a season in your journey, but you know what? Put them aside right now. Because they're distractions. I want you to get to know Jesus because he's going to teach you all those things and more. Wow. I felt really offended. I felt like he was cutting me off. He didn't want to spend time with me. I felt like he was somehow pushing me out of the nest, and he was, for my own sake. Because I can stand up here today and speak of what God says in the scriptures to me because of his words. Because I don't get it from anyone else but Jesus. But I don't get it perfectly either. I don't stand up here as the Word of God before you. Definitely not. Don't set people up as experts over your life, letting them tell you what to do. Save that authority for God. Let him tell you what to do. This is discipleship. This is what was missing when my brother said, "Ha, I knew you weren't a believer." I had no discipleship yet, and it was many years later till I even knew what the word meant. I didn't have people around me who could show me what God's authority looked like in my life. Because it's not always easy to see. Yeah, on hot button issues, yeah, sure, I shouldn't commit adultery, I shouldn't murder, absolutely. I'm in. But those are the easy ones. What does God's authority look like my life when I approach my boss? Or when I look at my bank account? Or when I look across the table at a friend who's just disappointed me? Those are the times when God's authority is not always clear. And information isn't always going to do it. I need to actually see it happen. I need to see somebody being Jesus. No one should carry the title of Father. You only have one Father, and he is in heaven. Do not let people maneuver you into taking charge of them. There is only one life leader for you and them, Christ. And then listen to this. Do you want to stand up? Then step down. Be a servant. If you puff yourself up, you'll get the wind knocked out of you. But if you're content to simply be yourself, your life will count for God. Amen. Amen. simplicity of these words, Eugene Peterson's Message translation. This has been the single most, I think, the threshold of my faith for so long, to just learn to be content being myself. But I can stand here and testify with great joy that I'm more myself today than I even was last week standing before you, or even the week before. God is beginning to free me and just say, you know what, Christian? Trust me. I made you this way. There's nothing about you. Nothing about you that rules you out. And he says that to every one of us. He's saying that to each of you right now because I know how we go as people. Even inspiring messages, wasn't it our former President Mandela who said that the greatest fear is not our failures, but what we can actually be in our successes? Something, forgive me if the heresy of paraphrasing, but a friend of mine is guided by those words, and I think that this is true. Sometimes we sabotage ourselves. We're inspired that we can do anything in Christ, but then we see too much of a picture of ourselves and not enough of a picture of Christ. Or we think that when Christ was here, everything was this public show, and all of his work was this ministry that we read about in the scriptures. But the most powerful part of his ministry was never written about, because it was the times he spent with those disciples who eventually were willing to die for what he did. We only get little snapshots of that. 5 or 6 times we hear the intimate details. But he wants to share those intimate details with you. Not read it from a book. He wants to reveal it to you. We see the beginning of this in the road to Emmaus after the crucifixion. 2 disciples are doing exactly what he said not to do. He said, stay in the city. And they're leaving. They're going away from the city. They're disobeying him in their fear, in their doubt. And what does he do? He joins them. He comes alongside them. And he opens up the scriptures to them. And then they see. Listen to what Jeremiah says. Before the passage we wrote, this is what Jeremiah says. In his dream, he says to God, you trained me well. You broke me, a wild yearling horse, to the saddle. Now, put me trained in obedience to use. You are my God. This is what growth looks like. This training that we talked about, we're going to talk about it because it happens differently for each kind of person. Rudolph's been teaching us as a worship team the last couple of weeks on a Thursday night. And one of the things that he opened up for us that we're going to explore a bit is how every person connects differently with God. And then what this training looks like is based on what you're meant to be doing for God. The training isn't, there is some foundational training that everybody, how to pray, how to read your scriptures, what your spiritual gifts are. But beyond that, there's a whole layer of training that is specific to you because of what God has for you. What God has for you and you. Because he has something for all of us. So the biggest problem I think that we don't get from the words of Jeremiah was there is no longer a line between the professional spiritual people, the ministers and pastors, and the flock. Those lines are gone. We're all together. We are all ministers now. We have a ministry, Paul says, of reconciliation. It means it means reconciling people with God, like evangelism and introducing them to Jesus. But sometimes our ministry is just making sure the people in our office don't bite each other's backs all the time. That's a ministry of reconciling. It's a ministry that we're all invited into. We're going to close with these final words. Think about this. This is the prophet who watched the nation get scattered and the temple destroyed. And this is the words he said to his people. Blessed is the man that trusts in the Lord, for he shall be as a tree planted by the waters and spreads out its roots by the river and shall not see when heat comes. But its foliage shall be luxuriant and shall not be anxious in the year of drought. Neither will it cease from yielding fruit. Such words of hope, I want to end on that hopeful charge today because the seed that was planted for each one of us so long ago, it only requires one bit of fertilizer from us, and that is our trust. And sometimes that's a difficult thing. That's why I believe Jesus started with the disciples small, and he didn't send them out the first time alone in the wilderness. He sent them in groups, he prepared them, and he gave them others to walk with. And he sent them out. But he also sent them out with a challenge. They only had enough food to make it a little while. He sent them out so that they would be at the mercy of God. They would learn very practically that in order to do your ministry, you've got to rely on God. You can get what you need, but doesn't mean you have it right now. But that shouldn't stop you. Amen? Amen. Amen. Yeah. That's where God has brought my heart this week, just this place of trust and I hope that these scriptures stirred up a bit of the pictures of what we might think about when we gather together and what growth looks like. Because I'll just summarize again. I spent way too long thinking it was about the right information about God and looking to leaders to sort out my theology. And all the while, I have no doubt God was looking and going, Christian, you already have what I gave you. You have everything that you need. Why don't you just get on with it? Why don't you just get on with it? I believe he's saying that to me in my spirit right now, and I feel the challenge of that. But I believe he's not just saying it to me. I believe he's speaking to many of us today. There are so many places that we can serve. He says, if you want to stand out, step down. There's plenty of positions that you can step down to in this church, into service. You'll hear about more as we come in the next few weeks. But I just want to end on this positive, hopeful note. I'm going to go to my guitar after a prayer, and I'm just going to play something that feels right in the moment. I invite you to come up to the table. But I want to pray a prayer to instill our faith right now.